Hey there, you groovy cats. Welcome now to Pop Could Never Save Us, and this is our second retro show. We're really pleased that you could be here.
We're feeling very gear.
We are indeed gear, we're fab, we are Iron Giant, we are Vito Corleone, we're all those 60s fad words. So we're glad to have you with us here. How are you doing, Holly?
I'm very far out. I'm feeling extremely trippy and Californian.
Absolutely. Let's walk on down that Sunset Strip and all the way over to San Francisco. Yes, it's 1966. Things are about to kick off in the most major way.
As the Germans kicked off, England looked unfamiliar in their red shirt.
I think we said when we were doing the 50s show that there was a possibility of ourselves always just continually finding the charts to be in a transitional phase. Well, if that's always true, it's particularly always true with these songs.
Like in the 1950s, there's still prestige pop and teen pop, doo-wop still hanging around. And there's the phenomenon of copycat covers. But there's also Mersey beat. We've got folk, but it's not backwards-looking folk. It's not folk like we had in the 50s where everyone was trying to sound like they were a Deep South bluesman or whatever. This is folk with modern rock production techniques. We've got psychedelic pop. There's also even the reaction. There's still some American traditional pop, show tunes, and the Ballad of the Green Berets. Like it wasn't hippies buying that thing.
Back at home, a young wife waits. Her green beret has met his fate. He has died for those oppressed, leaving her this last request. But silver wings.
The Ballad of the Green Berets was something that I did not expect to see on this chart. A pro-Vietnam folk song that goes on about just how brave our boys over in Vietnam are. The sounds here, I'm not sure if it's because we've been brought up with 60s pop as the soundtrack to our lives, as our mums do spring cleaning, as what's going on in very cool films, but there's something timeless about the way this chart goes through there. It's very easy to listen to from front to back without feeling displaced. There's a unity to the sound here, even though it's disparate across Mersey beat, folk and pro-American imperialist propaganda. All the way through there is a pleasant listening experience for me.
You know, as for me, the music my parents raised me on was 70s music, so I'm a little bit after this. But I do think all the sounds here are sounds that still basically exist in pop, which is not the case for the 1950s charts. The folk music is stuff that has stuck around. You know, Simon and Garfunkel and Bob Dylan, giants of songwriting, are always relevant because people are always looking back to what they're doing. Even the rock music is stuff that you will have heard if you were listening to Landfill Indie in 2007, like I think both of us were. It's just become the way that slightly retro guitar-led pop sounds.
Somebody help me now. Won't somebody tell me what I've done wrong?
It's so true. It's the classic idea of a chart-topping hit. It's the way that the likes of the Libertines...
What about you over there? Well, do you think I care? Well, I know.
the Klaxons we mentioned recently.
Galloping, galloping beams faster, joining together and still faster.
Even as they embrace new sounds, there is just an idea of this is what rock music is supposed to sound like. And obviously we get more diverse and we find little niches into which to bang our heads. But there's, I think, a feeling that 60s rock and roll and pop is just the default setting. It's the screensaver for pop music.
Yeah, they've figured it out. It occurred to me just before we did this show that we're actually only a couple of months out from another thing that is just the background radiation of the British cultural brain, England winning the World Cup.
Then Jeff Hurst, cool and collected, had the ball in the net. No, it bounced out. Goal claimed England. No goal, protested the Germans. The referee consulted the linesman, who'd been in line with the posts, and goal it was.
If you've ever been anywhere near British magazines, if you've ever seen a British advert, if you've ever had the misfortune to hear Baddiel and Skinner sing a song, this is huge. It is put on a par with beating Adolf Hitler in 1945 in terms of achievements. And as this generation of footballers slowly die off, like post-imperial England's kind of slide away from relevance, you can see that there's a sense of sinking sands today. You know, we're never going to win the World Cup again. But in 1966, we're not quite there yet. It's a world full of possibility. The hair is starting to get longer on the kids, but it's not quite down to the shoulders yet. But there, we're getting towards the place that has been enshrined through 40 years of Cream magazine as the most important time in the world and the most important place. As if you could ever have a centre of the universe, it was London in 1966 and 1967.
And it did surprise me how much of this chart was still very American. A lot of the Mersey sound is still going, but it's a minor concern.
There's a very clear delineation between those two sounds. It's not as if someone coming over from America, like Simon and Garfunkel, are trying to ape Freddie and the Dreamers. That's not on the cultural agenda, even slightly. They're now bringing back rock and roll with their own twist. You know, there's that cliche of obviously rock and roll comes from African Americans, and nerdish, fey, white British boys played their version and then took it back to the States.
The American sound is actually a lot less traditional. Although the American sound is still looking back to folk and blues, there's more of a sense of rebellion, I suppose, while a lot of the British stuff is still looking back towards Victoriana and the culture of their parents. It's worth pointing out the least cool song on this entire chart, in my opinion, is Cilla Black's Alfie. Cilla Black was brought into the charts by George Martin, who was looking for other acts from Liverpool to represent in the wake of the Beatles. And it's not a sound that you really have anyone in this chart from America doing, with the exception of Elvis's appearance.
Yes, indeed. And Cilla Black came from the Cavern coat check, you know, just by the very virtue that she was Liverpudlian and was able to sing to a certain extent, was enough in the early 60s. And by moving into the mode of light entertainment, she continued to be a presence on our screens well into our adulthood as well, until she passed away.
Yeah.
That's what we get here, is these all-round entertainers. There's no shame for a lot of these pop acts to move in to the same direction as the likes of Val Doonican, who also had a lot of syndicated British TV shows. Whereas you certainly couldn't imagine Paul Simon taking over for Johnny Carson. It just wasn't the same link in America like that. Things would turn rougher and things would get more revolutionary in terms of the way that the hippies would take things. But the violence in those revolutionary movements wouldn't come for another 2 years, when in 1968 it started to seem to someone who was switched on with politics like the world was exploding. And you got darker music. You had the Rolling Stones doing Street Fighting Man. You had
Jimi Hendrix playing his guitar through heavy distortion. There's very little distortion on these charts.
The distortion barrier had been broken just 2 years previously with You Really Got Me by the Kinks. A sound that was achieved by slashing the monitors with razor blades. That's how they got the guitar to sound, as they said, like a dog barking. This is still kind of pre-distortion, as you say.
Jimi Hendrix had an engineer. He actually invented the fuzz pedal for Hendrix. And as soon as you get the fuzz pedal turning up, suddenly things are just possible with the guitar that were not possible without the fuzz pedal, because the fuzz sustains the note at a long, constant level, and that's how you get wails and shrieks. right now, a lot of the charts here sound very plucky and bouncy. Because there just isn't the level of sustain that you'll begin to get once guitar pedals become popular. And with that, should we go into the chart?
Sounds great, yeah. So at number 1 this week is Pretty Flamingo by Manfred Mann.
All of the guys call her Flamingo, 'cause her hair glows like the sun and her eyes can light the sky.
So, what did you think of this one?
I was very confused by the central image of this song. It's a girl walking down the street song, which is a genre that did not survive the end of the 60s, but there were many, in fact one by Manfred Mann.
There she was, just walking down the street singing.
Also, Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman.
Pretty woman walking down the street, pretty woman.
It was a good time to be a girl walking down the street. In this, the girl is called Pretty Flamingo because she's so gorgeous, but have you ever actually seen a flamingo walking?
Here they will breed after a strict formal courtship, signalling their intentions with turning heads and flashing wings.
But I think that's the joke. I think there's a lot of psychedelia is based on this kind of saying stuff that doesn't quite make sense but feels right. And I think it gives a nice kind of playful edge to this song.
Pretty Flamingo is euphonic, even in its meaninglessness. It's got that going for it. It just sounds pretty, it's nice to sing. But, yeah, has she got pink hair? I don't get the sense. I imagine this is just a blonde dolly bird, as they would have called them at the time.
Yeah, the song even mentions she's wearing red.
Crimson dress that clings so tight.
Famously not the colours that flamingos are.
It's true. But yeah, as you say, it's a classic time for the male gaze. Just there was a lot of guys out looking at the ladies on the hip streets of London. I think what this does have is a nice sonic experience to offer. I love the wind instrument they use it. It takes it just to another level entirely, because this could very easily lie there. That, for me, brings in a new texture. It makes it a more interesting listen, and I can see how a song like that would get to number 1.
It's a summer jam.
It is that, yeah. There's something very beachy about the entire feel.
I don't have a lot else to say about it, unfortunately.
No. So, at number 2 is a song called Daydream by the Lovin' Spoonful.
What a day for a daydream. What a day for a daydreaming boy. And I'm lost in a daydream. Dreaming about my birthday.
This one is an American band, and what it does have is it does harken back to that classic era of the Great American Songbook, I think. I think it's got a lot in common with something like Dream a Little Dream of Me. I think it's very self-consciously reaching back to that dozing feeling that
In your dreams, whatever they be, dream a little dream of me.
John Sebastian would have felt as a child whilst those sounds came out of the radio. It does have the contemporary sound. It's got beautiful production and a lazy, enrapturing vocal. It sounds like what it's singing about, which I'm not quite sure that Pretty Flamingo did.
This song is happy in a way that you almost never hear in modern pop music outside of pastiche. I'm thinking of something like the Bruno Mars's Lazy Song.
Today I don't feel like doing anything.
Which is insufferable. But this is just genuinely very happy. There's playing the spoons on this record.
Tomorrow I pay the dues for dropping my low.
A bit of an affectation from old folk that was making a little bit of a comeback here. It feels to me like chord progressions were a far more significant thing for pop at this time than they are now. Every song has these beautiful chord progressions, and we'll talk more about that when we get to covering one of the other artists here. But one thing that really struck me with this is the way that the the bass arpeggios feel like they're not starting on the root note, and it gives this feeling of suspension and also wrong footing.
Custom made for a daydreaming boy.
Which goes with the theme. It's very... I don't want to call it bubblegum because in the 60s that has a very specific meaning that this song isn't.
Yeah.
But there's like a childish Candyland vibe to this. Then you get the honky-tonk piano and the whistling. And the whistling, unfortunately, scared the shit out of me because it made me realise that, oh my God, this is what, like, advert music was attempting to do.
Tax Assist accountants make things simple so you can focus on growing your business.
This is where that sound started.
Just that shuffling acoustic guitar. This was one that I just had to pull out the acoustic myself for and play along with. And it's got, as you say, a really nice chord progression. It goes D7, A7. There's lovely, strong, homely G in there. And the background of it is nicely connected, but it elaborates on it in a way that you'd associate more with someone like George Martin, who of course produces some songs that are on this chart, as we've already said. It just seems like there's a lot of thought and a lot of craft that's gone into this. I could have believed that if someone had told me this had come from a musical, if it come from a Disney film even, that's the feel that this has to me.
So number 3 is a song that I think is still remembered as a classic, but this isn't a version that I think most of us know. And it was Bang Bang, My Baby Shot Me Down.
I was 5 and he was 6. We rode on horses made of sticks. He wore black and I wore white. He would always win the fight. Bang, bang, he shot me down.
I started playing this as we were going through the charts, and I thought, oh wow, Cher covered this song. Good for her. Because I've got a passing familiarity with the best of Cher, the likes of her version of the Buddy Rich drums keep pounding the rhythm to the beat. But then I found out that this song was originated by her. This is the first recording and had been written by Sonny Bono. Of course, all of us now would associate it with the Nancy Sinatra version because of its use in the Tarantino film Kill Bill.
I was 5 and he was 6. We rode on horses made of sticks. He wore black and I wore white. He would always win the fight. Bang, bang, he shot me down. Bang, bang.
Of course, bringing us straight back up to 2023 thanks to SZA's excellent song Kill Bill.
Not only was I getting massive waves of SZA from this, I have sort of quite intense emotions associated with this song, partly because it is a song that is about abuse, written by a man who was an abuser.
I wasn't aware of Sonny Bono's dark side. I had bought the smiling I Got You Babe cover.
I got to wear my ring.
The only thing that I knew about him apart from this is that he crashed into some trees. Oh no.
When I smoke out, I hit the trees harder than Sonny Bono. Oh no!
And that he had been a US congressman. So
She described him as a terrible husband and said that he treated her as an object rather than like a wife. He wasn't quite as awful as the character in the song, but there seems to be some sort of demon here that he was trying to express. But the thing is, the song itself is so incredibly effective. You get this beautiful, dramatic progression here. The minor first, the minor fourth, and then the fifth with a seventh. That is a folk music progression, and there's a theming here of cowboys going with the Western craze. This would have been very relevant and current. But it's also very girly in this wonderful way. Like the woman in this song, although she is a victim, you never actually feel like she is being constantly battered she feels like she's in a situation where she should be equal to this guy. The song opens up with the two of them playing as children, playing cowboys. You know, the basic joke of the song is that the childhood friend kindled a romance with the woman that was the same as the way he used to pick on her when they were kids. Not a dynamic you generally see in abusive romance songs, but the thing is, the emotion you're left with is kind of just enjoying the blood-splattered grandeur of it. I mean, I first heard this song when I was in high school, and I remember my best friend at the time gave me one of the earbuds to listen to it on her MP3 player. And obviously, because of the stereo mixing, which was a very new thing in the 1960s, I was barely getting any of the instrumental. In the 1960s, because stereo technology was new, the stereo mixing was what would now be considered to be a bad mix to our ears. Nowadays, pretty much, we keep the engine of the song, which is the bass and the kick drum, dead center in the picture because we can't really distinguish the direction of bass sounds very well. And we will have the vocal also in the dead center because they're the main character. And everything else will either be sort of narrow but slightly to the side. Things have to be mixed so they will play well on all kinds of different speakers, so they'll sound slightly less crap coming out of your phone speaker on the back of the bus, but also sound good on headphones. And so people are paranoid about doing anything silly with mixing now. But back then, it was quite common to have elements panned hard left and hard right, which means they're the only channel that would be playing, and with nothing in the other ear. And so the result is listening to this stuff on headphones now is a bit disturbing. But yeah, I remember my friend was obsessed with this song, and she kept saying that she wanted to use it to make anime music videos too of her favourite anime boy pairings, and I won't embarrass her by saying what they were.
Fantastic. But yeah, it does. There's such a depth of creepiness to this song. It's got a grandeur in its horror, and I think some of that is undercut by the power not only of Cher's vocals here, but also in the way that Nancy Sinatra sings it in the now better known version. It's not got the sense of vulnerability that another abusive song such as He Hit Me and It Felt Like a Kiss, which was written by Jerry Goffin and Carole King for the Crystals. That one is truly difficult to listen to because there's an emotional honesty to it.
He hit me, and it felt like a kiss. He hit me.
There's a verisimilitude. It's got a truth about how that feels, whereas this is seen through the long shots of Sergio Leone. You're seeing this as an art piece. You're not necessarily getting into the heads of the people involved here. There's something that this does that the Nancy Sinatra version doesn't do, which it goes into double time, and that almost makes it into a strange party song.
I think the chorus just sort of dominates proceedings here a little too much because nobody's actually getting literally shot in this song.
Yeah.
But it somehow feels like they could be.
You get the picture of an abusive American husband in a wife beater. There's going to be a gun in the house somewhere. So it's a possibility in the 60s that would be on people's minds. But of course, the past tense, my baby shot me down, that's not literally true because it's being sung from a woman who's clearly alive.
My baby shot me down.
Also, we've got Dusty Springfield in her first appearance on the show, the iconic Chanteuse, as I believe that's pronounced, with You Don't Have to Say You Love Me.
You don't have to say you love me, just be close at hand. You don't have to stay forever.
This was famously covered by Mr. Elvis Presley because he was in his Las Vegas phase He only really pulled himself out of a torpor to sing songs that challenged him vocally or expressed a depression so cosmically huge it would allow him to express some form of emotion, which this song has both of.
Believe me, oh, believe me, oh, you don't have to say you love me, just be close at hand.
What did you think of You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, Ollie?
Well, the key thing with You Don't Have to Say You Love Me is that the verses are in this deep, dramatic minor key, similar to the kind of tonal world that was being used in My Baby Shot Me Down.
You said you would always stay.
But in the middle of it, you then get this beautiful, big, major key doo-wop chorus that takes us right into mainstream pop.
Believe me, I can't help but love you, but believe me, I'll never tie you down.
I looked into the background of this song. It wasn't one that I'd done an awful lot of exploration on, and I was massively intrigued on how this had come to be. It was a part of an Italian movie soundtrack, and that film was based on the Greek Electra myth, which, for those who aren't familiar, is the inverse of the Oedipal myth, where a woman and her father fall in love, which explains some of the strange repressed emotions that kind of darts through the verses there.
Mi vuoi lasciare io che non vivo più di un'ora senza te.
This was picked up by Simon Napier Bell, who's one of the gadflies of 60s pop music, who went on to the 70s and 80s. And if you ever read his memoir about his time in pop music, it's much like sitting with an older relative who is cultured and intelligent over a glass of red wine, where I say tell you the most fascinating stories. But they had no idea what the song was about when they put it together for Springfield. They wrote their own lyrics, they tossed them out in an afternoon, and that's the genesis of the song that we have here.
Wow, incest.
Yay.
But the thing is, it could work as like a kind of a daddy-daughter incest song, because the basic conceit of it is like settling for not having the person you want. With that big major key chorus as well, it's like it's both pleading and it's almost at peace with the fact that she's never going to get him.
There's a sense of acceptance within the song. With Dusty here, and she puts in one of the great seductive vocals on Son of a Preacher Man. With this one, I feel like she's kind of showing off her vocal talents rather than singing the story of the song here. I get that sense particularly in the verses.
A lot of classic Italian pop is about sort of melodramatic, virtuosic vocals, because that creates the atmosphere of, I don't want to say camp, but like intensity that is part of the Italian pop music aesthetic.
That sense of acceptance of, I'm sad, but that's essentially all right, is something that lives through so much pop music and can be a cathartic help for people going through tough times with their own relationships and point a direction forwards. It's almost a semi-public service.
Should we move on?
I'm ready, yeah. So, the next one we have is Sloop John B by the Beach Boys.
This is certainly not a vague lyric.
It's appealed to, people's lives, being sailors out there, having a bad time, getting drunk and robbed, and all the Nassau County issues. But I love the Beach Boys. I find so much inspiration in Brian's battles with his own mental health and with the band wanting him to just stay in the box of the guy who stole Chuck Berry riffs to sing about surfing.
If everybody had an ocean.
And his great monument of artistry where he got everything massively Tourette Pet Sounds. This was the only obvious single because it was only added to make this less fucked with the formula, as Beach Boys member and all-round shithead Mike Love would try and stop Brian Wilson from doing.
The thing I feel about the Beach Boys is that the Beatles are the band that the 1960s wanted to be. Always, no matter how complicated they got, they always had that sort of poppy lightness to them. They moved with the times and transformed to be whatever the times called of them to be. And then the Beach Boys are the band the 1960s deserved.
I love you most of all, my favorite vegetable.
A lot weirder. A lot more grasping at the face of God. And a lot more disastrous at times as well.
Certainly.
Like, the Beach Boys is the only band in the world where one of the members was hanging around with the racist serial killer who destroyed the 1960s, and he isn't even the worst member.
Yes, indeed. There's that Manson factor. The thing I think about Pet Sounds is that the music itself and the way it's produced and arranged, it's celestial, it's the music in the spheres, it's perfect. It feels at times like being embraced by a loving God and smelling her hair as you do. And yet the lyrics are using this instrument of the mellotron in order to express the most banal, maladjusted 15-year-old boy obsessions.
Take my hand and listen to my heart.
And that is a wonderful juxtaposition. But at the same time, I do find myself, when it comes to Pet Sounds, listening to the instrumental versions, which are like Bart, compared to the ones with lyrics, which are beautifully sung. I've got very little respect for the literary ambitions.
I disagree with that entirely. I find Pet Sounds a really quite difficult listen, partly because of just how incredibly dense the production is, but also because of how depressing that lyric is. And at risk of being like a, hey students, do you know what else reminds you of that cool thing that you like on TikTok, the best way I can describe it is that it makes me think of hyperpop. It's that same feeling of deliberate overproduction, but with every song about total disillusionment, total pain, this uncanny feeling that the Beach Boys are a teen pop group that has somehow just spiraled off into the void. There's this sense of them having broken through into another dimension where they're just not supposed to be. Sloop John B, I feel, is one of the less specifically teen pop ones because it's based on a folk song, I believe, from the South. So yeah, have fun with the appropriation discourse there. I'm not going to. But one of the things here was that Brian Wilson felt that the original folk song didn't have a complicated enough chord progression for him. And so he re-engineers the entire thing on these strange teetering chords.
He caught the fit, threw away on my grid.
Which is why it has such a strange, unsettling vibe, because you never get that sense of security.
It feels as though you're on a rotting boat sonically, and I love that. And what I do love is the certain groundedness to this lyric. Like so much of the folk canon, it tells you the story in the simplest possible way, using as few words as possible. It's ruthless in the narrative, which I really respect. I think it works as both a Beach Boys song and a folk song. I'm actually really quite high on this recording. As a vocal, as a set of lyrics on Pet Sounds, I think it's the best on there for that reason.
I would agree with you. Like a lot of folk songs, it's concerned with the misery of being a normal person.
Yeah.
The story of the Sloop John B is that it's a working voyage. Everything goes wrong. The other staff members screw over the narrator.
Yeah.
And the narrator is constantly wanting to go home.
Exactly.
Throughout Pet Sounds, you do get a lot of cynicism around the psychedelic culture of San Francisco. Obviously, here he changes one of the lyrics to "This is the worst trip I've ever been on" to try and turn it into a LSD abuse allegory. But I think it's too boring to sort of just simplify it as being about a bad LSD trip. It feels like that's almost like the cheeky fake reading that he wanted to give it so people could giggle to themselves over joints while thinking they'd spotted the answer, you know? Yeah. I feel here, it feels like a disillusion with the labour of being a songwriter. Brian Wilson was having a really miserable time of it. His record label really had very little interest in the Beach Boys as an artistic unit and was using them to churn out ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ran type stuff. That Brian Wilson felt completely beneath him. But at the same time, he clearly hated the counterculture and celebrity. Here, it's almost as if, like, he's saying, get away. I want to concentrate on my work, doing my stuff, my beautiful arrangements. I don't care about all of this stuff I have to do, mopping up after you.
Strange to hear in a song that on the surface of it is so overwhelmingly positive. Have you ever heard "This is the worst trip I've ever been on" sung with such a beaming, toothy American smile?
This is the worst trip I've ever been on.
Yeah, it's a genuinely like alienating recording in like the Brechtian sense, not the Marxist sense, although that's there too.
Indeed. Yeah, as a product, the album's starting to come into its own, and while it's not something that I think Brian Wilson would ever have consciously thought of, he was a man whose incredible gift expressed itself through music rather than through any linear thought that could lead itself to a Marxist essay. I think the fact that we have this tagged on at the end of Pet Sounds, or rather, it's not at the end of the track listing, but it's not one that was within the conception of this album that's so often taken to be the most perfect of all time, wonderfully composed in the same way Beethoven is, and all that other Q magazine stuff that sadly turns out to be quite close to the truth. There is a bowing to commercialism here, because he has to have something that has to go on the charts. It has to chart, otherwise we won't be able to tour, you won't be able to make money, and you won't be able to play piano in that sandbox, which is starting to look suspiciously overflowing. I hope you're okay, Brian. You know what I mean?
I think one of the things that I actually said to you between recordings, which you didn't interpret the way I'd intended, was that hearing it on the charts, it doesn't immediately jump out as being the work of greatness in the same way that you would expect from an album that is as venerated from Pet Sounds. Hearing it in this context, it sounds like a pop record with a big wall of sound production and slots in perfectly comfortably after Dusty Springfield. You know, and Pet Sounds didn't actually do that well commercially. It wasn't selling as well as the Barbara Ann type stuff that his record label wanted him to do.
No.
You can really understand why it was that people didn't recognise its genius, because there's just too much of the conventional 60s boy band kind of sound here. I don't think Pet Sounds would be anywhere near as effective in artwork if it didn't have that. If it was sung by all these serious musicians trying to be moody, you would basically get pretty much every sort of tweak or indie record that Pitchfork was really excited about in the late 2000s. You know, that all begins with Pet Sounds. Or like, if it had an arrogant vocal, you're basically left with Kanye West. But instead you get, in the same way that Phil Spector had these women anchoring his wall of sound recordings, where they just sounded like they were just being completely swamped in this abusive orchestra. With Pet Sounds, you get this sense of deep disillusionment with his place as a pop star through the actual medium of a throwaway pop record. It's part of why it feels so sickening. There's no sense of irony here even. It's just someone using the medium of beach pop to express deep cosmic pain.
Yeah, and it's all in there, all of that stuff, and yet it does exist, as I say, in a universe where the boating metaphor doesn't necessarily need to be taken as that. You can take this entirely surface-based and it be...
As a song about a boat.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the Beach Boys always had their nautical theming. They were generally on surfboards rather than boats, but he's still at the beach.
And the stuff that Brian had written prior to Pet Sounds, it was deeply affecting. It plays that same... I don't want to say trick because that seems like I'm diminishing it, but it's got that same take where something like Surfer Girl, the lyrics are, I'm very in love with you, I can see you standing by the ocean door, all that sort of stuff, but there's such a deep and wrenching sadness at the core of these things that are supposed to be about happy, that are supposed to make this artist who had a very conventional, if extraordinarily abusive upbringing.
Do you love me? Do you surfer girl, surfer girl, surfer girl?
I should feel this way about this set of circumstances, but I don't. That's kind of what was being expressed until the point where Wilson's mental health became too bad for him to even function and find his escape in music as he had previously done.
Talking about Brian Wilson's illness is like incredibly difficult, but there is some of the music he made after his mental illness had really got the better of him is still absolutely remarkable.
Yes.
And if you're in the mood to just like weep, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with confusion, looking into the work of the old Brian Wilson is worth doing. It's very uneven. But there is some astonishing stuff in there.
Yeah, totally. And just a tragic story, just again and again. But yeah, I'm not going to make myself sad or lift the sand while reflecting too much on Brian Wilson. This comes from extraordinary creative peak. Not just for Wilson, not just for the Beach Boys, not just for pop music, but it's a peak of human expression here, and I think it's entirely in keeping with the type of artist that Wilson was at his best, when not haunted by his demons, that the song that went out to the world as the summer of love was on the horizon, as we're in the time of swinging London, is one that has a beautiful double meaning, and is on the face of it about a bad time on a happy sounding boat. I think there's nothing wrong with that in the slightest.
No, it goes back to that childishness which is often a part of psychedelia. If you just take the lyric at face value, it's almost like something a parent could sing to their kid while they played with a boat in the bath.
Yeah, and that's how the previous versions of this had kind of taken it, you know, the likes of the Kingston Trio.
See how the mainsail set. Call for the captain ashore. Let me go home. Let me go home. Let me go home.
Gosh, it's so hard to even find anything new to say about something off Pet Sounds because it's been so canonized that it's almost become fixed. It's like how you go around all your life just thinking that Shakespeare is super great, and then you actually read some and it's like messier but also better than you thought it was.
Realer, more human.
A lot of these canonized 1960s albums, the greatness becomes this incredibly intimidating aspect to them. I've mentioned I have that wall with the Beatles where they've been so endlessly venerated that it's really hard to hear it as being just remarkable pop music. You want it to completely change your life.
And that leads to a just as unhelpful backlash where people go and seek perfection, unachievable by human hands, find that it's not there and go, I hate the Beatles, they're useless, which is just as silly a take as they're the greatest people who've ever walked on God's green earth.
Exactly, yeah. Thing is, when we're talking about great records, we've actually got multiple legendary, unbelievable songs in this chart as well. We have Bob Dylan with One of Us Must Know at number 33. We've got California Dreaming by the Mamas and the Papas directly below it at number 34. This is a wild time.
Yeah, and with the Dylan song, that comes His progression as an artist had been very tight as I'm going to sing old folk songs to the best of my ability, and then I'm going to start writing my own. And he goes from this enclosed, tightened, very almost metronomic guitar playing style to getting to the point where he makes the albums that he's best known for. And we find him here right at what I would consider his artistic peak as well, when things have gotten looser with Bringing It All Back Home, and then with Highway 61 Revisited, it starts to just open up even further. And then with Blonde on Blonde, it's so loose, it sounds like it's going to rattle to pieces. He can not keep a hold of this creativity that's bubbling out of him at this stage, and a step back is inevitable, and that's what comes next after the likes of Sooner or Later, One of Us Must Know. But yeah, it's a great song, that.
It's not a song that sort of drips with super genius. It's not the sort of thing that it's actually quite a vague and direct lyric for him simultaneously. It's almost Taylor Swift-ish. There's a bitchiness to the lyrics here.
When you whispered in my ear and asked me if I was leaving with you or her, I didn't realize just what I did hear. I didn't realize how young you were.
Dylan was a bitch.
It wasn't the stuff that you associate with Dylan, which is, I think stereotypically, it's those poetic, stoner, cryptic crossword songs. Yeah.
Yeah, he was very capable of saying, and the yellow handbag of desperation falls from the claw above. But simultaneously, you would have him at this time doing things like Positively 4th Street, which is beautifully bitchy. And like Rolling Stone is a microscopically piercing lyric, just aimed at whatever direction seemed to have crossed his artistic gaze at the time. But yeah, you're right. One of Us Must Know, Sooner or Later, One of Us Must Know is not those things, and it's not the other thing that he's best known for. He's kind of writing lyrics like Paul McCartney here.
The most baffling image in the song, to my mind, is that you were just kidding me, you weren't really from the farm, which could be some sort of metaphor for his lover not actually being a sort of back-to-earth hippie.
Told me later as I apologized that you were just kidding me, you weren't really from the farm.
Genius.com suggests it's actually him talking directly about the folk and rock scene, that it's a reference to Maggie's farm.
I ain't gonna work on Maggie's farm no more.
Which was his response to people getting mad at him for playing the electric guitar.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that as a reader. Of course, he's famously, I referenced it in a previous episode of ours, being in Manchester and have someone shouting Judas at him for changing his choice of acts. It seemed a very big deal at the time. It doesn't feel like the words are necessarily the point with this either.
No. What is really beautiful about this song is the incredible quality of, much like with the Beach Boys, but in a totally different aesthetic, the quality of the playing and the arranging, which he obsessed over. Yeah. The band around him just seems to really click together in this very beautiful way, but at the same time there's a space to it and the minimalism.
To make you so sad, you just happen to be there, that's all.
It's not like Brian Wilson's productions on Pet Sounds, where every couple of bars you feel like he's just like shoving this deviation in there because it just occurred to him. But listening to it on this chart, it's so much more beautiful than everything around it.
Yeah.
Obviously, with Dylan, you've always got his voice, which is it's a point of friction.
An acquired taste.
But you just did what you were supposed to do.
I think there's a sort of a modernity here. It's sort of made it a bit more timeless. If he was singing these big brassy vocals, or God forbid the smiley Beach Boy harmonies, it wouldn't I don't think the song would be as effective. There's something here which is like the beginnings of punk. It was obviously like an affected voice. It was something he was doing for his folk character, but there's a punkish willingness to be ugly here. Of course, we know the arc that Dylan's career is going to take, and it's going to involve making some very baffling career moves, going further than anyone else has ever gone before at being really annoying.
Wiggle, wiggle like a bowl of soup. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle like a rolling hoop. Wiggle, wiggle. You may call me Terry, or you may call me Timmy. You may call me Bobby, or you may call me Zimmy. You may...
Water tired horses in the sun. How am I supposed to get in and ride and done?
His mind works in a way that is so different to other people that carrying on in one way is just never an option for him. Rather infamously, when he performs his old songs live, he does them in arrangements that are so different that they're almost unrecognisable.
Yeah, he's not someone who's going to cater to an audience, and that's always been a part of his overall vibe, or at least it has been since this period comes to a close after about 1967, 1968. That's when you see him growing disgusted with people looking at him like he is some sort of genius or a voice of a generation. And so much of his career has been a very punk rock reaction to that. I know that with his voice, Charles Shaar Murray said in his biography of Jimi Hendrix that Dylan is how people who can't sing learn how to sing. He's the voice that people go to when they can't carry a tune in the traditional way. And that does go down the years like that. But it works perfectly here. I couldn't, as you say, I couldn't imagine another way of singing this song.
Dylan's vocal style was influenced by talking blues, which is obviously like a forerunner to rap. Interestingly enough, when they actually finally invented hip-hop,
I've indulged in high knowledge to scan of encyclopedia, keeping constant research of our reports in news media. Kids starve in Ethiopia, and we are getting greedier. The rich are getting richer, and the needy's getting needier.
while recording a guest feature for Curtis Blow, Blow played him NWA and Public Enemy, and Dylan had a mental breakdown. He felt that hip-hop was achieving what it was that he'd been trying to achieve with music but hadn't been able to see, and he became convinced that the person who would replace him would be a great rapper.
Totally, yeah, he loves that stuff. You know, the likes of Ice Cube and LL Cool J and Eminem, to live in his lyrical world. He sees a kinship between himself and the verbose and word-conscious hip-hop artists.
Yes,
and in his book, Chronicles, he very much beats up that style of things.
He talks about how he likes basically any songs written by people who have his love of language. And obviously, a lot of the more literary end of hip-hop is based on just loving language for its own sake in a way that Dylan sometimes approached.
And other times, he didn't seem to want to write songs
Yeah.
at all.
Dylanology is really hard because you're dealing with Dylan the legend at the same time as you're also dealing with Dylan the artist as he actually exists, who is someone who put out a Christmas album. Did an advert for Victoria's Secret.
With you in my head.
He had his religious conversion and his album where he got mad at everyone for not liking his religious conversion.
Yeah, and I will say that on that Christmas record, Must Be Santa is a great bloody recording. It's just alive with this Zydeco accordion sound and the video of a riotous party. Oh, I want to attend that party. But yeah, Dylanology, in taking him, well, it goes back to the Shakespeare thing, in taking him as this flawless human being who has so much to tell us about the human condition, more so than anyone else, you take away what makes them interesting and difficult. And a lot of what formed Dylan the artist is the fact that he liked the sound of important sounding words. He liked records where it seemed as though they had a point. And I think if you forget that, you lose sight of what makes him important, as well as being the guy who, in the Martin Scorsese documentary, was found outside I think it was a Blackpool pet shop, just having the best time in the world, putting different words in different places, saying, I want to sell my cigarettes for my dogs. Those are the two sides of Dylan that I think remain consistent through a 60-plus year career.
The other thing that it takes away from Dylan is just how funny he was.
Exactly.
Because, like, for some reason, as soon as we assume something is great, we assume it must also be deadly serious. And so you're stuck listening to Desolation Row. Well, this must be the most meaningful thing ever, but I just can't pin my mind on what this means.
All except for Cain and Abel and the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Everybody is making love or else expecting rain.
When in reality, it's more like Bob Dylan's version of, like, We Made You.
Jessica, rest assured, Superman to the rescue, ya. Can you blame me? You're my Amy, I'm your Blake. Matter of fact, bake me a birthday cake.
So, talking of things being funny, there were a couple of novelty songs in the charts this week, neither of which were on Spotify. The first was number 25, The Master Singers' Highway Code.
The Highway Code, Part 1.
And the second of which, at number 35, was Communication by David McCullough.
Who am I? Where am I?
So, taking these in turn, we'll start with the Master Singers' Highway Code, which you might think is some kind of 60s pop-style metaphor for how your baby makes you want to cross the road, or something like that. It's not that. What it is, this song that wasn't considered good enough for Spotify, is a Benedictine a cappella monk-style version of the Highway Code.
Where there is no adequate footpath, walk on the right of the road to face oncoming traffic.
It's one of those things that I couldn't quite believe existed once I found it.
Yeah, bizarrely, it was produced by George Martin. It was clearly not busy enough making Sgt. Pepper at this point. It was produced as an in-joke by a group of 4 teachers at Abingdon College, I believe.
Oxfordshire, okay.
4 of the schoolmasters did these sorts of Benedictine monk versions of just like nonsense arranged into plain song. And it was actually arranged by a physics teacher, and they got this thing recorded and they mostly just circulated it around their friends and family in the school as an in-joke, but a copy of it ended up in the hands of Parlophone and it got radio play and it ended up charting. What is quite funny about it is its commitment to the bit. It never cracks, it never indicates that it's actually supposed to be a joke. And it is similar to a lot of British humour of this time and of the 70s, which was just obsessed with its own medium. There was a sense around the mid-century that media was coming to dominate more of people's minds than before.
This room is surrounded by film.
And it's the same kind of joke here. It's like the inane rhythms of schoolmasters filled with nonsense. It's very similar, actually, to a lot of internet humour. There was a particular skit I saw on Twitter a couple of days ago where somebody had done a version of the Terms and Conditions sung by Bob Dylan.
If you read one of these terms of service as an individual arbiter, will you refer to you?
Which is essentially the same joke.
It does strike me as they are spoofing something that's no longer part of the culture, which has meant that this has aged terribly, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, humour does age. However, I do kind of like the holiness of it. I mean, you know how British people get about their cars, right?
Yeah.
The traditional British obsession with bureaucracy, the idea of rules being holy writ. It does work as a joke, basically. I did find this genuinely funny. Although I can say, as music, it's not something I would be likely to throw on, except to annoy people.
Okay. Yeah, you've brought up a couple of things there. That is a song that shows the difference between a British person's approach to their car, going out on a Sunday and washing it in front of the neighbours, versus an American's, someone like Bruce Springsteen writing about the open highway in front of him and the freedom that's there. I think the British experience is very different. It's that you're caught in lay-bys and going round roundabouts, and it's not the same thing.
It is in part due to the actual physical infrastructure of both countries. Britain has horrible tiny roads where you have to obey the law all the time. You're constantly stuck turning around or driving between great big hedges where you can't see anything. I don't think this is the case in most of America, which is actually designed for cars. In British car music, there's more of a sense of car being a frustrating place where you obey the rules. Yeah. Why doesn't everyone else obey the rules, you know?
Baby, we were born to obey. Absolutely.
The general sort of British bootlicker personality here comes into play. And with these being public school people, they're raising the next generation of boots for us to lick.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, there's more to this than my initial cursive look at it had to show there.
Should we move on to talking about David McCullum?
Oh my God, yes, this was a fun...
I loved this.
I know. I'll go and see what men have done before me in the past. In case there's one...
I play it without any context, and what I found was that it was great in a kind of Patrick McGowan kind of way. It would have been something that the Village was doing to mess with Number 6. It's an intriguing recording. Yeah. This mixture of the James Bond cool with the surrealism of the music that's happening there and the laid-back vocals. And it genuinely came from the man from Uncle, which is amazing.
Yeah, so this is one of my favourite genres of music, which is actors' vanity projects. So David McCallum was famous for playing Ilya Kuryakin on The Man from Uncle, and he was immediately a massive sex symbol. This song is like clearly designed to capitalize off his Ilya persona. You know, you can't talk to me, my pretty girls. I am off thinking about the universe.
But I need to know.
And it's this incredibly sleazy lounge kitsch backing, laser precise, dated to 1966. Yeah. Do you remember there was around the turn of the millennium a sort of cult aesthetic? It was Austin Powers. Or former Spice Girls getting campy.
Cold-blooded, hot gossip, superficial expectations. Look at me.
That was sort of referencing this movement, but there's nothing to prepare you for just how deliciously kitschy this is.
Please help us get through you.
I know. I'll go and see what men have done before me in the past. In case there's one who wrote or drew or painted, perhaps in fun, a moment of his life that gave him pause.
Anyway, one thing about David McCallum is that his actual contributions to music were surprisingly significant. He was a classically trained musician, and music was actually one of his major loves. And he soon became bored of making these singles where he was pretending to be Ilya. He moved into being a band leader for a group that would produce instrumental versions of TV themes, like the Batman theme, so on. He made a particular recording called The Edge. And I don't know if you actually got to listen to this, James.
No, I didn't actually. No.
I'm going to just send you the link and I want you to play it and react to it in real time.
Okay, fantastic.
You'll get it within the first couple of seconds.
Okay. So I've got a cover of a glowering British man. His Britishness is all too clear. Who, incidentally, viewers of trash TV on Channel 5 would recognise as the old scientist man from NCIS. Incidentally, that was his kind of late career renaissance. Okay, so the YouTube link has come on. Oh, fucking hell. Oh, that's amazing.
It's the motherfucking DMC.
Oh, wow. I didn't see this coming.
What a great sample.
Oh, Dr. Dre. Yeah, don't just stand there, operate. Come on.
It's just really interesting to me how these silly little kitsch records ended up becoming like reinterpreted for some of the coolest music ever, because when I listened to the next episode, I didn't even hear that kind of 60s sleaze sound. There isn't even that kind of James Bond feel about it.
No, the next episode has a feel that's sheer G-Funk, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I assumed it had come from a minor guy who had played with James Brown and then went on to a career afterwards. That was what it was. The idea that it has this basis in such a particular moment in time, it really speaks to, well, obviously McCallum's done an incredible job in, originating this music.
Because that sample is awesome. Like, it's gorgeous. It immediately just pins you to the spot. And the way that Dre rearranged it to put all the big orchestral blats earlier in the song and then go into that little guitar solo as the main feature is brilliant. He just sort of shortcutted straight to the bits that are great about that little musical passage.
That's the beauty of hip-hop, and obviously it goes back to those initial days when you were having parties in the Bronx. You're going to just hear the best part of this. We're going to zoom cut to this, and you dance to this little section here all night long. I think that this might be a well that future hip-hop producers should go towards, because there's going to be a lot of very funky psychedelic influenced tracks for these spy movies that were tossed out a dime a dozen in not the mid to late 60s.
When you think of the 1960s in Britain, one of the things that I always think of is fashion.
A rock and roll fashion show of the latest Carnaby Street gear. The clothes are with it, and the buyers don't want to be left without it.
And it's really striking just how many songs on this chart have a reference to all the 1960s fashions, but a lot of them were pretty negative about the whole thing, even before it had really begun.
Fashion shows just aren't what they used to be, at least not in London, the swinging city. As the dancers get more with it, there seems to be less of it so far as clothes go, and they don't go far.
Yeah, I think that there's a very British mistrust of the new styles coming in. And after years and years of a staid country, very little change in loose grey suits that hadn't been any different for men since the 1920s, really. Basically, you dress in the way your dad had and his dad had. And to see new fashions come in, particularly for men, and in ways that seem feminising, imagine having hair that goes past your ears.
A 17-year-old Davy Jones has just founded the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men.
But for the last 2 years we've had comments like "darling" and "can I carry a handbag?"
It's going to make people, in their first knee-jerk reaction, display some mistrust of the coming times, and I think that's what we're seeing here.
Obviously, we've got Dedicated Follower of Fashion by the Kinks, which is at number 29 on our chart.
He's got to buy the best, 'cause he's a dedicated follower of fashion.
But you also get similar themes to that, to my ears, in Substitute by The Who at number 12.
I was born with a plastic spoon in my mouth.
Yes, and both of which are among my favourite songs of all time. And The Who were big, brash, modish fashion at this point. They were Union Jack suits. They had hair that did indeed come down to their ears. Roger Daltrey was starting to learn how to be a rock star. He was on the journey to being the golden god that he would eventually become throughout the 70s. And I think the idea of working class boys from the Acton area that the Who were, there's, even though they're using these things to get a name out there, being so very image conscious like the best art school rockers would be, I think that Townsend is cynical enough an artist to undercut himself even as he's using this and other gimmicks such as the destruction of guitars to catch attention. That would be to underplay the classic garage rock chord progression here, Daltrey's great vocals, and Keith Moon's drumming, which is just, it's so enveloping, it's so intense. Moon, a man who always enjoyed abusing more or less every substance throughout his short life, recorded this in a blackout. And he was depressed that The Who had got on a different drummer to do Substitute, until it was pointed out to him, no, listen, you're the only person that I know who screams when he tries to get to a difficult drum part, and that is indeed in the background there.
That is brilliant.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
One thing that endlessly thrills me, and it's probably a bit of a songwriting gimmick, and that's the false end. I love when it comes thundering back in after you think the song's over. And it's one that would go on to be covered by punk bands. The Sex Pistols would do a version. The Ramones would do a version. Immortal.
I think there's also a class element here, which must have really been one of the reasons for the cynicism about the new Carnaby Street subculture, was because a lot of it was rich kids just taking advantage of daddy's money. And a lot of these people, you know, they were having to have their sisters like sew up these clothes for them, you know, which is a lot of the joke in Substitute, is this idea that his outfit isn't what it's supposed to be.
Really made out of sack.
My fine-looking suit is really made out of sack. This was like not actually far from the truth. If you actually look at those old clothes from Granny Takes a Trip, a lot of them were made out of household fabric. They would get offcuts for it because it was cheaper. You would be wearing upholstery material. It was not that comfortable. There's a reason why a lot of this stuff is really valuable now, is because it fell apart.
Right. And that would go through to the glam rock era as well, which of course chronologically isn't that far away from now. I've seen some of Bowie's suits from the Ziggy era, and you see it now, and it has barely survived.
If you've actually spent any time doing vintage clothes shopping, you will find these 1970s crepe clothing that still feels and looks new because it's just made out of some sort of bulletproof form of plastic and is horrible to wear. But yeah, you get the high-heeled shoes here. There's like a bit of an androgyny to that. But at the same time, this character in Substitute is kind of a bigoted piece of shit. He mentions being ashamed of his black father. And also, you get a little bit of sort of Beastie Boys-ish sexism, where the narrator points out that although his girl is substituting the man she actually wants with this obvious loser in a nice suit, he is substituting her for his mum. and using her to do his washing.
Girls. It's completely a work of the 60s, this. And I think while it remains a mainstay of The Who's set lists, I'm sure they'd be rightly embarrassed of this, because there's no irony sitting here at all. This is...
I think it's ironic. It's never been cool to admit you want to have sex with a girl because she reminds you of your mother. Putting it in a song is itself a layer of irony. I think you're supposed to relate to this narrator, but I don't think you're supposed to entirely like him, because the whole song is about what a poser he is, so...
And of course, the Kinks' dedicated follower of fashion. It's less first person. Davies is the observer. He's the person who's having a cup of tea and watching the world go by him and making little judgments and snarky asides.
When he does his little rounds round the boutiques of London town.
You kind of get this sense here of him making fun of the rich kids without actually trying to blend in.
Dedicated follower of fashion.
And it's a little bit nastier. He's wearing these frilly nylon panties. It's straight up homophobic.
Thinks he is a flower to be looked at. And when he pulls his frilly nylon panties right up tight, you feel...
Yeah, I think that there's that distrust of the coming days. Davies would be a man who his best work is marked by nostalgia for an imaginary England, a kind of Blakean village dream. An imaginary lost innocence.
And there's one particular double entendre in the song that really caught my ear. In matters of the cloth, he is as fickle as can be. That refers to the idea of him changing his outfit every time fashions change. In matters of the cloth, that refers to ecclesiastical matters, this idea of matters of faith.
You're seeing, in the same way, a kind of denigration of the idea of being flighty around your beliefs, about changing your beliefs with your overcoat. It's quite insightful because what was coming was a very surface level understanding of Eastern philosophy, Indian music. That was all going to come in the late 60s. I think that Davies is not going to show any outright hostility to new ideas or anything like that, but he's at his most comfortable in a traditional church kind of place.
Well, I mean, the thing is, nobody likes these people now either. Shallowness and consumerism has always been looked down upon because it's seen as a substitute for a personality. If you were living in a subculture where that was being absolutely venerated, it would have been really annoying.
Yeah, like you'd expect with the Kinks, this has got an unforgettable melody. It's a true earworm. And I love what he does with the vocals, where he's not the world's greatest singer by any stretch of the imagination, but he knows exactly how to sell the story of the song. And the little piss-takey escapes up into a highfalutin accent on the edges of the chorus. I think it's just wonderful.
Yeah, they really point out that what he's making fun of is rich kids, not the kids like The Who were dressing up in mod fashion because they were trying to get people to take them seriously, get out of the factory.
I think it was one of The Who's manager who defined mod as living well under difficult circumstances.
Poor people have to work hard to look good because they don't have the money to have it delivered for them. Yeah. It's the difference between genuine street fashion and somebody nowadays who can just buy whatever the rarest and most expensive trainers are on StockX. This isn't really worth spending a lot of time on, but I feel I do have to mention this. Remember in the last couple of episodes I talked about people having knockoffs of their hit, like Nicki Minaj and Meghan Trainor? I do have to give an absolute black mark to Nancy Sinatra here for How Does That Grab You, Darling?
You smart aleck tomcat, you. When the sun goes down and the moon comes up, I'm gonna go out and proud.
It's a great record, but I've heard the record before. This is just These Boots Are Made for Walking, but not as good.
Yeah. You keep lying when you ought to be truthing.
And it's really embarrassing. There's parts in the production where the actual instruments are doing the same thing that they did in These Boots Are Made for Walking in order to make the sound of the boots. But they're just doing it here in a song that's got nothing to do with boots. It's madness.
It is very strange. This seems like these boots were made for walking in dub, and she's kind of just...
Yeah, it's a freestyle.
Exactly, she's toasting over the same backing track, it seems.
Shameless. Should we talk about Elvis now?
Yes, indeed. While we still have these up-and-comers, there are still people sticking around from the 50s. There's Cliff Richard in one of the few songs of his that I haven't loathed, actually. And much more interestingly, Elvis appears. What's interesting about this track is it comes from the Elvis movie period.
He was as good as Brando. But you didn't want to see him in movies where he didn't sing. Thanks to me, his life became one big Hollywood movie. Starring Priscilla.
He's throwing out 2 films a year with absolutely zero worry about the quality. Just being told where to stand, what to say, and then going home to enjoy being high. That's the period that we're at here. And it's very rare that you get a sense of real engagement with the music. The man was a pro. You know, he would sing these things as well as he could find himself to do.
Yeah.
And he had a lot of good producers in this time, but it was in service of usually dreck.
Yes.
However, Frankie and Johnny, it is one of the better Elvis movies. And we're about 2 years away from Elvis kicking films out of his career for good. This fits in with the sound of 1966 in a way that I didn't expect it to. Not in the early rock music kind of way. It fits in with the things like the Righteous Brothers and some of the soul songs. And Elvis seems engaged in this song.
Yeah.
And he's not floating above everything. There's a barrel house piano that I think works really well and I think has much more to do with the music that Presley loved, the country, the soul music, than what he would usually have to just throw out in a tossed-off recording session for another inferior film.
My lucky poker was fading when a new gal caught my eye. I gambled I'd try to change my luck with a chick named Nellie Bly. I was Frank's man, but I was doing her wrong.
I actually enjoyed this song a lot more than I did the two rock and rollers that we had from the 1950s episode.
Yeah.
He's a better vocalist here, and he does something that I really enjoy in Elvis's performances, which is that there's always like this degree of irony. Not a nasty irony, but he's like, I know I'm performing and you know I'm performing and we're all in on the joke together. There's a real humour about how he sings.
Real gently caught my wound, it hurts me so. I was her man, but I done her wrong.
It's like somebody like Dave Grohl going on stage and doing all those old rock star hero moves and poses.
He benefits here from this being a standard, you know, and it's a song about murder.
I'm sure he heard a bluesman playing this on Beale Street, you know, at some point in his life.
Yeah, and the story of it is that Elvis's character is cheating on his girl, and his girl just shoots him with a pistol and he dies, which is awesome. I would actually recommend giving this one a quick listen if you are someone who has been brainwashed by the story that Elvis never made any good music after he got into the films and stopped being cool.
The last one that I think is worthy of note is Sorrow by the Merseys.
With your long blonde hair and your eyes of blue, the only thing I ever get from you is sorrow.
I think that's probably best known for turning up on Bowie's Pin-Ups when he does a cover of that.
You never do what you know you ought to. Something tells me you're the devil's daughter. Sorrow.
But the original sits as a real slick movement of 1960s pop. So that worked for me. I mean, the thing about this charts is there's very, very few of them that I just simply don't enjoy. It's got the sound that I want.
Yeah, we've also got some genuine all-time eternal greats putting out their best albums here. We've got, like, Blonde on Blonde, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme, Pet Sounds. Like, come on.
That's madness, isn't it? To think that these were coming out within days of each other. Some of these immortal hits that will sit on the 500 greatest albums to listen to before you die lists, and will continue to do so forever.
And also just loads of songs that everyone kind of knows, like California Dreaming by the Mamas and the Papas. And it's a beautiful song as well because it has this, in the same way that a lot of the British rock on this charts is already very cynical about the British mod scene. California Dreaming is incredibly cynical about the hippie scene in Los Angeles. You know, when you actually read about what was going on in the hippie subculture in Haight-Ashbury, a lot of the people who were caught up in that were people who were literally homeless. There were lots of people who were teenage runaways who were escaping abusive families, which is part of the reason why the scene did end up decaying into sex work and drug abuse over time, because these people were broke. They were desperate. They were escaping the draft. They were trying to find a new way of living when they had no resources. And it was also part of what made that subculture open to manipulation by evil gurus such as Charles Manson.
It's the story of someone going through a dark part of the country, a cold, dark part of the country, and they're fantasizing about being in California where it's all apparently going on. But the song knows there's that feeling that once the protagonist of this song gets to California, if they ever do, they'll likely be just as unhappy.
Yeah, there's a sense of being cast out by God.
Stopped into a church. I passed along the way. Well, I got down on my knees, and I pretend to pray.
Beautiful record, and it's one that, you know, most people were taught at school. If you had to join a choir, maybe go up on stage, you had to sing this. Re-examine this as a record, I urge you, because it's more or less perfect. So, yeah, that's 1966. Thanks indeed so much for listening to this episode with us. It's been a real joy to discuss these songs and to dive into them. And next time you hear us, we'll be going straight back into 2023. So thanks for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Do we have the next destination on our time machine?
Oh, yes, indeed. Let's turn it on now.
How about the 25th of May, 1973? Does that sound like a good year?
Let's land there, and we'll jump out and find out exactly what's going on with these locals.
And just before we go, what was our pick of the week?
So my pick of the week, it has to be Substitute by The Who. That's where I'm landing on.
I'm probably going to go with Sloop John B.
Yeah, I can get with you on that. I love that record. Cool. So that's a bit of disagreement there, but two amazing songs.
That's the thing. This chart has got so much stuff that's totally amazing in it.
I could make a good case for 75% of these songs being the best song on here, quite happily.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
All the leaves are brown,
the leaves are brown,
and the sky is grey.
All the leaves are brown.
I've been for a walk.
All the leaves are brown
On a winter's day.
All the leaves are brown.
Stop! What are you doing? You're supposed to be following my lead.
No, it's